All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited. The Noah Creatives meetup is coming after a little pause because we had some personal things, so we were kind of busy taking care of that, but very happy to have Chris Wick and Clare Maker join us today, and they'll be presenting the topic, delivering a successful cross-platform design system that people actually want to use. I'm so excited that you decided to present at our meetup today, and cannot wait to hear. I don't want to introduce you because I know you already have going to talk about yourself, and really happy. So Chris and Clare, please take over, and thank you for being here.
Sure, thank you. So the genesis of this presentation was really just a project that Clare and I were working on together to re-envision the design language system that we had where we currently work. And we found that there were a lot of common pitfalls that the existing systems prior to the one that we worked on had fallen into. And so we kind of just want to share what those pitfalls were and what we encountered as we were going through that. We also want to just talk through a bit about how we chose to define a design system as we were embarking on this project. And then finally, we want to walk through the specific tech solution that we went down in order to solve this. Not that that's the only possible solution, but we just want to talk about what it was that we implemented and how we think that worked very well to help us design at scale. So with that, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. So I'm Chris Wicke. I am a designer, full stack. I started my career, the first 5 years or so, I was really focused on visual. And in fact, my degree is in graphic design. And then the past 10 years or so, I've been getting more and more into interaction design, UX, UI. I also do research and several other things in my current role. I'm based in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'll pass to Clare to introduce herself.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Clare Maker. I am based in Brooklyn, New York, and I've been in some form of the design field for about 20 years. My original education was in sculpture and 3D product design, and always had, been dabbling back when Photoshop was Photoshop like 2 or something embarrassing like that. So yeah, but I'm very happy to be here and excited to be presenting on this topic. Okay, so I'll kick this off. So like Chris said, we both work at a large company with hundreds of designers and products. And so we saw that we really were, that's a place where you can really use a design system. But we might want to just run through this little checklist and see if a design system is the right fit for your company or your product in the first place. So a design system can help you design more quickly at scale. It can alleviate strain on designers to work on more complex problems. It simplifies communication between disciplines. It can ensure visual consistency, as most of us will know. And it also helps educate and onboard designers quickly, so new people joining your team. But you may not need a design system if your team isn't doing like a ton of active product development. You may not have that need for speed. If your development team is small and communicates well, and even as your team grows, there's less expensive ways to improve communication than building a full-on design system. If your business has a limited runway, it may not be worth the time and investment for someone or a company that's trying to stay lean or do like a quick test and learn. So we just wanted to start there and so that people take the time to consider like the true costs and benefits of building a design system. Because right now there is a lot of hype around design systems. And so just wanted to level set there on the reasons why you would want to even build one in the first place. Okay, so let's also level set on a definition of a design system for this talk. So for the purpose of this talk, we'll use this definition, and it probably looks pretty familiar to you. So a design system is a set of standards intended to act as a source of truth that enables the design of consistent experiences using reusable and flexible components and patterns. So we'll probably take a look at these terms that we highlighted in that definition, and we can all agree that, like, yeah, that sounds right. And when interpreted correctly, these terms are advantageous to a design system. But I'm going to hand it over to Chris to talk about what we heard during research with users of a system that was already implemented at our company, and how misinterpretation of these terms led to trouble with implementation and adoption of the system. And then we'll also describe after that how we address the issues. So.
Sure. So as Claire said, there had been many attempts at our company to start up guides. There was one core one that was mentioned when we initially started doing our research. There were other peripheral ones for some of the sub-brands and other areas around the company. What we found was, although there were several, none of them were really widely adopted. Even the one that was supposed to be the core for the business was largely ignored and had led to a proliferation of other sub-libraries. We set about finding out why initially before we even started building anything, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't repeat any of the mistakes of past folks who had set out to do this previously. And in looking at the existing systems, all of them had exhibited a kind of consistency. They had been a kind of source of truth, and they exhibited a kind of flexibility. They exemplified the letter of those definitions, but not quite the spirit. So if we look at consistency, that could be interpreted in many different ways. So synonymous with consistency might be cohesiveness or ubiquity, constancy, sameness, congruity, homogeneity. What we found in looking at the system that we were working with was that there had been this idea of consistency meaning sameness, meaning cookie cutter, right? So the idea is that I can just pull everything off the shelf, and if that problem has been solved previously, there's no reason why that shouldn't be able to be used again and assembled just in a different configuration. So the idea was that there was kind of this assembly line where I can just take these off-the-shelf solutions. And one of the quotes that we heard from people, however, when talking to them about this was, I'm not crazy about canned solutions. I feel like I can't be creative. So there's that piece of creativity that's missing. But I think more important than that, when we really dug in on what they meant about creativity, it was the result of them doing continuing research and their users telling them, hey, the solutions that you're presenting to me aren't working for the specific pattern that I'm trying to solve. So basically, these off-the-shelf solutions didn't take into account that people are working on different experiences. So again, this is part of the fact that systems should be used for design at scale. And as part of design at scale, you have to recognize that there are a lot of different types of products out there, and that the way that you solve form fields, for instance, for a marketing website might differ significantly from some sort of logged in experience where you have a longer form field. And what we really heard too was that, the design system should help you solve a problem, not try to solve the problem for you. It should be created in service of meeting user needs, and you shouldn't try to bend the user needs to fit into the system. So again, what we ended up doing was creating some how might we statements for the future system that we wanted to generate. The how might we statement we created around consistency was how might we foster cohesion while respecting the individuality of each experience and knowing that people want to do right by their users. The next term that Claire highlighted at the beginning of the presentation was source of truth. And what we found with source of truth was that people were also interpreting that in a variety of ways. The one that we saw surfacing where we work was kind of this permanent record or etched in stone kind of idea. And what they wanted was to write a bunch of rules, set them in stone, and walk away and say, you know, the design system is complete, it is perfect, and it won't change over time. I think we know that to not, in fact, be true, that really there needs to be a lot of maintenance around the design system, especially as patterns and brand and other elements that contribute to the design system change over time. So one of the comments that we heard from folks that we interviewed was, whenever the brand team decides to make even the most minor of change, could be swapping a color, changing a font, we're never given the budget to go back and make updates. And the way that the system was set up was such that you had to go back and refactor each individual instance of something like that. So if they changed the color in just one place, you had to hit all 3,000 pages where that showed up, right? And change the hex code at the individual level there. Now, some teams had their own component libraries and they could change it there, but again, they had to touch every single component that was impacted. So there's really just this a temporal idea here, right? Where we can't etch this in stone, we can't just leave it alone. It has to serve us over a really broad period of time, and it has to adapt appropriately for however the system and the work that we're doing is evolving. So our how might we statement here was, how might we build a system that connects products and helps them evolve simultaneously? This is just to, again, make sure that products are never left behind in time and that they sit there until someone finally musters up the budget to refactor. The third concept that Claire talked about was flexibility, which again can be interpreted multiple ways. It could be looked at as configurability, or it could be looked at as like an all-inclusive one-size-fits-all or universality. That was the tact that folks we were working with were taking, which was the idea that if I just make this system have enough scope, it can cover absolutely every situation. That's also not possible. We saw that manifest in specific components that got really bloated. So right here, we had a quote from someone about our header component where they said it was getting out of hand. We're being asked to account for way too many variables. What we saw with that was just every single team needed a little bit of a different thing out of the header. And so they said, hey, can you just add this option here or that option there? And it was confusing, first of all, for designers to go and look at it and say, what choices do I make if I'm building a new product? Like, what parts and pieces are required? What parts and pieces are not? Can I use this part in this way? Or is this specifically for some other use case? And there had to be a whole lot of documentation around it. In addition to the difficulty that that added for designers, there was complexity for developers too, where they had to pull in these massive components that bloated the code on the page, even if they only needed a piece or two. In addition to that, there's just the aspect of the next quote here, where as soon as you're like not able to use that component exactly as built, you are left to guess and make a judgment call. So if you go in there and for some reason, whatever combination you need hasn't been accounted for, you have to say, well, like, how do I kind of reverse engineer this component and try to Frankenstein's monster it so that I can have sort of the thing that I need? So there were a lot of folks trying to, take components, reverse engineer them, make their own version of it, because there wasn't really a toolkit in existence to say, here's how we made this thing, and here's how you should make a comparable thing. There was just, here's the thing, use it. And if you can't, too bad, so sad. So the how might we statement that we created around this was how might we provide tools that help us build solutions to all problems, even ones we can't predict. So not creating the solution, create the tools to build the solution. So just in summary, I'll take a look at, the existing design system that we were working with and how through those how might we's we talked about what we wanted to create instead. So the existing design system that we had was slow moving, and they did one at a time documentation of each component. And there was an emphasis on that documentation, right? Everything had to be documented. It was slow moving because we had to go product by product. And there was a real focus on the one that we looked at in particular on a single platform and a single experience, because they hadn't really exhausted everything that they needed to build for that one experience. So they couldn't even move on to the next one. What we wanted in the reimagined system was something fast-paced, experience agnostic, and that was focused on being generative rather than documenting and cataloging everything that could possibly exist. We wanted it to allow for people to generate their own solutions. Also, with the existing design system, there was extensive refactoring for every minor style change. So we wanted to move that to efficiency and cascading style changes. And also because we were dealing with a really large organization with a lot of different sub-brands and suites of brands, the existing system had a complete separation of libraries for those suites of brands. We wanted one where there was actually reusability between them, and that there was some way to not lose all of that work that was done, to have to like copy, paste, and maintain 5 or 6 separate libraries for those different brands. So with that, I will pass it to Claire to talk about the specific tech solution that we ended up going with to solve most of these problems.
Great, thanks, Chris. Okay, so I'm going to present now about what the reimagined system was. So what did it look like? What changed? And how we addressed those how might we statements. So what we learned from our research was that the prevailing system was focused on this higher level of complexity, providing templates, web components, and web styles. And users needed a way to create bespoke designs for unique problems that they were solving. And they also needed to be able to do it on native Android and iOS. So to the far right, you can see this new atomic level of the system called design tokens. And I'm going to tell you all about what they are. So on this slide, we can see a few examples of tokens to help paint the picture of what we mean by atomic values. Tokens can be anything in product design that is represented by one value. So for color, that's a hex. For a font size, that's a pixel. There's a handful of other, dimensional tokens here for size, spacing, radius, and border width. And there's even a token for timing. So for transition length, that is represented by 0.4 seconds. So 1 unit there. And a system will have a multitude of tokens for each attribute. So here we see examples of color, spacing, and shadow tokens. And color tokens are extra interesting because we may have more than one token for a specific color value. So for example, our font primary is this deep purple, but maybe our primary button color or primary action color is also this deep purple. And by doing this, creating these kind of aliases, if we decide to in the future to change and say we want blue buttons, we have very discrete control and more than we would in traditional web design or CSS, where we had this brand purple. And you would have to go and say, okay, where did we apply brand purple? Okay, in the headings, we want to leave it. And in the buttons, we want to change it. And so I just wanted to call out there that you can have the same value represented by different tokens. Okay, So let's think about that word, source of truth. How might we build a system that connects products and helps them evolve simultaneously? So here's how the system is structured. Design tokens live in this JSON file in the center here. And then you'll see Amazon Style Dictionary, and that's a build system that takes that JSON data and translates it into XML or Swift or Sass, or it's very configurable, a variety of other languages as well. And there are other ones besides the Amazon Style Dictionary. So for example, Salesforce has Theo that's usable. But yeah, when we look at this, we can see, okay, all of these products are mapping back to that source of truth, that very core JSON file. So when brand styles are inevitably changed, or even like Chris started to talk about, we're kind of having a different brand or a sister brand or a white label product, rather than requiring developers to kind of go and revisit each product, we can update that JSON file at the core, and each of those products, all of the products, regardless of platform, can receive those updates. And lastly, I'll just touch on the design tools. So I'm sure a lot of designers on this call have used libraries, but our system, it uses the same token names in our libraries, so that when engineers inspect, so our color is called like color font primary, or color action primary. An engineer can look at our design and knows that the token is the corresponding token. So okay, and so let's think about the word flexibility. So how might we provide tools that help us build solutions to all problems, even ones we can't predict? So let's say that we need to create a card for an iOS app, but there doesn't exist one in the system. What we can do is say, okay, I'm going to start with tokens. And so what I know is I have a background color. I have a radius that I can use here. I can use this type style, which is comprised of these tokens. I can use the card shadow, a border container, and I can choose an icon size, another color. And then I can also use a component here. I can use the button component, but the button is also at a semi-abstracted level in the library, but it is also made of tokens. And so what I end up with is something that looks pretty on brand. This is the brand of this deck right now, but I built it from scratch, and by using the guidance of the tokens, I was able to build something that looks consistent with other experiences in the company. And so we can think about cohesion, and so from our leaders and our teams that want things to look similar, and for product teams that needed the space to solve a problem that was best suited to their user needs, we were asking, how might we foster cohesion while respecting the individuality of each experience? And we can see here that, there's these few different ways of maybe like an onboarding or some experience like that, where the team on the right needed to be able to explain maybe something more technical. But these feel like a family, and they feel like they belong together, but they're all very unique. And we weren't saying, here's a component for this and here's a component for that. We were just giving the building blocks in order to build things that look cohesive. And lastly, I'll touch on what Chris was mentioning about these sister brands. So here we have an example of maybe an onboarding screen, and we had this look. It's our brand for this deck. And we're using the font family default. And we're using a background gradient token here. We'll just use these two tokens for an example. And so when we change the value of the token, we're not changing the system and we're not creating new components. And so it's a very light way to get a completely different look or brand by changing tokens at that JSON level in our JSON repo, to create a whole nother brand, but still staying on the same system. And so that's like, you know, cutting your work in half. You're saying, okay, well, we're not the same brand as you. We need to go and do something different. Now we have the power to say, no, we can all be on the same system. And I think I'm going to hand back over to Chris to kind of round us out here.
Yeah, so I'll wrap it up for us. I guess just to sum up, obviously we talked about consistency, creating a source of truth, and being flexible today. But we want to remember that for consistency, we want to go for the cohesion of the fashion collection, not the faux pas of everyone wearing the same dress to the same event. With regard to being a source of truth, we want to accept that maybe a Sharpie might not be the right choice of writing implement when the subject matter that you're rendering is constantly changing. And we want to go for the configurability of Legos rather than the predetermined outcome of a puzzle. So something along those lines. And that'll really help you drive widespread adoption of the system. And it'll make people want to use the system because it's helpful, and not avoid it because it's an active hindrance to the work that they do. So with that, I'll just say thank you.